Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you with us today as we take a deep dive into, a moment in history. A moment you probably think you know pretty well, but we're going beyond the familiar. We're talking about the arrest of Jesus.
It's one of those pivotal events that, even centuries later, still has the power to fascinate and, I think, challenge us.
Absolutely. And today we're exploring it through the lens of the Urantia book, specifically excerpts from paper 183.
Now, for those unfamiliar, think of the Urantia book as a companion piece to the Bible, offering this really rich tapestry of details and insights into the life and teachings of Jesus.
It definitely adds another dimension to the story, doesn't it? Sort of like uncovering a hidden layer of history.
Exactly. And what we find in those layers can be incredibly revealing.
So let's jump right into it. We're in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's late, just hours before the crucifixion. And the Urantia book paints this incredibly vivid scene, almost cinematic, of Jesus deliberately separating himself from his apostles, who are fast asleep, by the way, just as Judas approaches with an armed band.
Yeah, the way it's described, it really pulls you into that moment. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the quiet anticipation.
Like something big is about to happen, but no one's quite sure what.
Exactly. And everyone involved, from Judas and the Roman soldiers to the temple guards and the sleeping apostles, they each become these incredibly complex figures.
Right, because they all have their own internal world, their own motivations and anxieties playing out in this pivotal moment.
Yeah. And I think the Urantia book does a remarkable job of pulling back those layers. For instance, we often think of Judas as this one-dimensional villain, purely driven by greed.
The 30 pieces of silver, right?
Exactly. But the Urantia book shows us another side of Judas, a man riddled with anxiety, terrified even, as he sets this betrayal in motion. Almost like that feeling you get when you've made a decision, but you haven't quite processed the weight of it yet.
That moment of no return.
Yeah. And we see him trying to distance himself, letting the soldiers take the lead, even hoping to avoid any direct confrontation with the apostles.
It's almost cowardly, isn't it?
Well, it makes you wonder if the money was the only thing on his mind. Or was there this element of fear driving him? Maybe even a desire to distance himself from a movement he'd come to doubt, or perhaps even fear.
Right, because the Urantia book makes it clear that Judas's plan was to identify Jesus quietly and then kind of melt back into the shadows.
Right, to remain unseen, anonymous almost.
But of course, Jesus throws a wrench into those plans. The Urantia book describes how Jesus deliberately reveals himself to the soldiers, essentially thwarting Judas's attempt to stay hidden.
Wow, that's an interesting detail. It makes you wonder if Jesus sensed Judas's desire to slink away unnoticed, almost like he's saying, no, you don't get to do this in secret.
It's a really subtle detail, but when you think about it, incredibly powerful.
Oh, absolutely. And, it speaks to this larger theme that runs throughout the Urantia book, this idea of Jesus's agency in his own arrest and ultimately in his crucifixion.
What do you mean by agency?
Well, this idea that it wasn't just something happening to him, he was actively choosing to meet his fate head on.
That's fascinating. So while Judas is trying to disappear into the background, Jesus is stepping directly into the light.
Precisely. And by doing so, he's also, in a way, taking control of the narrative. He's not giving Judas the satisfaction of a clean getaway, of escaping the consequences of his actions.
It's such a powerful contrast, and the Urantia book really captures that tension so well. But meanwhile, you've got the apostles completely oblivious to all of this drama unfolding around them.
Sound asleep, as the Urantia book tells us. Jesus actually has to wake some of them up.
It's almost comical when you think about it, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's such a poignant reminder of their human frailty. Here they are, the closest followers of Jesus, and yet they are completely unprepared for what's about to happen.
And that contrast between awareness and obliviousness, between those who are awake to the truth and those who are still slumbering, it's something we're going to see play out even more dramatically as the scene unfolds. It really does make you think, what would I have done in that moment if I'd been one of the apostles, sound asleep, and suddenly I'm thrust into this scene of chaos and confusion?
It's a real test of faith, isn't it? And as the Urantia book describes it, the apostles' reactions are very human, a mix of fear, loyalty, and just pure instinct.
Right, because at first there's this impulse to fight back. The Urantia book even mentions Peter drawing his sword, ready to defend Jesus.
Yeah, which, again, makes total sense, right? You see some you love, some you revere, being threatened, and your instinct is to protect them. But even in that chaotic moment, Jesus remains true to his teachings.
What do you mean?
Well, according to the Urantia book, Jesus actually stops Peter from fighting. He reminds him, and everyone present that his kingdom, his message, is not of this world. He doesn't need to be defended with violence.
So he's essentially choosing peace over power, acceptance over aggression.
Exactly. And it's a powerful reminder that true strength often lies in surrender. But as powerful as that moment is, what happens next is really telling. Because despite that initial impulse to fight, to stand by Jesus, fear ultimately takes hold.
And they run.
They scatter. They go into hiding. And it's interesting. The Urantia book tells us that Jesus had actually warned them this would happen. He had prepared them for this very scenario.
And yet they still panic.
It just goes to show you human nature is a complex thing. Even after witnessing countless miracles, even after hearing Jesus' teachings firsthand, fear can still take root.
And it makes you wonder, in that moment, what impact did this have on their faith? To see their leader, their teacher, arrested like a common criminal. Did it shatter their belief? Or did it deepen it in some unexpected way?
Such a good question. I mean, imagine the turmoil they must have been going through. Everything they thought they knew, everything they'd placed their faith in, was suddenly thrown into question.
It's like their whole world just got flipped upside down.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes the Urantia book's account so compelling. It doesn't shy away from these difficult emotions. It shows us the apostles at their most human, struggling to reconcile their fear and doubt with the profound teachings of Jesus.
And it's a struggle that I think many of us can relate to on some level, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. But, amidst all the fear and uncertainty, there's one disciple who stands out. The Urantia book really highlights John's remarkable loyalty in this moment.
Oh, that's right. While everyone else is running for the hills, John sticks around.
He does. He stays close to Jesus, even under Roman protection.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting, the Urantia book almost suggests that John instinctively understood the gravity of the situation in a way that the others didn't, at least not in that moment.
So he wasn't just being brave for the sake of being brave. He felt a deep sense of responsibility.
I think that's a good way to put it. And that decision to stay close, it proves pivotal, because according to the Urantia book, John becomes this crucial source of information for the other apostles.
So while they're in hiding, he's their link to Jesus.
Exactly. He's their eyes and ears during this chaotic time. And it's just another example of how the Urantia book reveals these intricate details that we might not pick up on in other accounts.
Right, because we often think of the arrest as this very cut and dried event, but the Urantia book shows us that there's so much more to the story.
Definitely. And speaking of details we might overlook, the Urantia book also highlights this little-known disagreement about where to take Jesus after his arrest.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about that. You'd assume it would be a straight shot to the high priest, but it wasn't quite that simple.
Not at all. You see, the Jewish temple guards, they wanted Jesus taken to Caiaphas, the acting high priest.
Makes sense.
Right. But the Roman captain, he had other ideas.
Oh, so who won out in this little tug of war?
Well, the Romans, ultimately, they were accustomed to dealing with Annas, the former high priest, for these kinds of legal matters. Plus, there were some interesting family ties involved because Annas was actually Caiaphas' father-in-law.
Wow, so you've got these political machinations happening right in the middle of this pivotal moment. It's like a whole other layer of intrigue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to the complex relationship between the Jewish and Roman authorities at the time. It wasn't just about religious persecution.
Mhm.
There were political motivations, power struggles, all woven into this narrative.
It really adds another dimension to the story, doesn't it?
It really does. And against this backdrop of political maneuvering, the Urantia book emphasizes this really striking detail, Jesus' silence.
Oh, right. From the moment he's arrested in the garden, all the way to his appearance before Annas, he doesn't say a word.
Not a single word.
Yeah.
He walks willingly with his captors, maintaining absolute silence.
Wow. It's such a powerful image. I mean, what do you think was going through his mind during that long walk to Annas' palace? The weight of the world must have been on his shoulders. It's really hard to imagine, isn't it, to have that level of certainty of peace in the face of such uncertainty.
It's an incredibly powerful image. And, the Urantia book doesn't explicitly state what's going through Jesus' mind, but it does suggest this deep understanding he possessed of the events unfolding.
Like he knew this was coming all along.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, his silence was his way of accepting that fate. Or perhaps even a form of quiet defiance against his captors? It's a question that has really captivated theologians for centuries.
And it's that sense of mystery, I think, that makes this story so enduring. We can analyze the historical context, we can delve into the motivations of all the different players, but ultimately, we're left with this enigma of Jesus' silence.
It's true, we're left to grapple with it, to find our own meaning in it.
It invites us to contemplate the nature of faith, of sacrifice, of the mystery of divine will.
Precisely. And while we may never fully comprehend what was going through Jesus' mind in those moments, the Urantia book allows us to engage with this pivotal event on a deeply personal level. I mean, we see the human drama unfold, the fear, the loyalty, the betrayal.
We see ourselves in these characters, even the ones we might not want to admit to.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes the Urantia book such a valuable companion to other texts. It reminds us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, there's a power in simply being present, in surrendering to something greater than ourselves.
A powerful message, and one that I think resonates deeply with anyone who's ever faced their own Gethsemane, their own moment of reckoning.
We've all been there, haven't we? In those moments where everything feels uncertain, where we're not sure what step to take next.
Exactly. So as we emerge from this deep dive into the arrest of Jesus, as told through the Urantia book, what's the one thought you hope our listeners will carry with them?
That even in silence, there is strength. That even in surrender, there can be profound purpose. And that sometimes the most transformative journeys, they begin in those quiet moments of contemplation, in the spaces between the words.
Beautifully said. Those quiet moments of reflection, those moments when we surrender to something bigger than ourselves, can often be the most transformative experiences of our lives. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Urantia book's perspective on the arrest of Jesus. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those deeper truths that lie just beneath the surface of the stories we think we know.